Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final webinar in the IHSP Policy Talk series for 2020. Very excited about our seminar today, where we've got Professor Annmarie Adams and Professor Nick Luca as a moderator. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. I'd also like to thank the organizers for the seminar series. We've had a great series of speakers and participants this semester. But Anik, Sonia, and Jen, thanks so much for dealing with the challenges of going virtual this semester and really making it a success. I'm looking forward to a great lineup for the winter. So without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to our moderator today, who's Professor Nick Luca. Professor Luca is jointly appointed between the Schools of Urban Planning and Architecture. He's the interim director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Montreal. And he's also, of course, an associate member of the IHSP and also the School of the Environment. Professor Luca, thanks so much for moderating today's session, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you so much, Professor Nandi, and it's a real pleasure to be welcoming all of you here today. And I'm delighted to be introducing my colleague and dear friend, Annmarie Adams, who is the Stevenson professor in the Peter Guo-hua School of Architecture, as well as the chair of the Department of Social Studies of Medicine here at McGill, and of course, an associate member of IHSP. So we are going to just a couple of logistical notes before I introduce Annmarie in terms of her trajectory. We are going to be recording this, as you've seen, and we will be keeping the microphone muted. We'll have 40 minutes approximately for Professor Adams to give her talk. She may not actually take up that entire time. And we'll have time for discussion, of course, questions and answers. And what I'd like to invite everyone to do is to, if you wish, to type your questions into the chat, and I'll keep track of that and then invite you to pose your question in the discussion period. So it's really a pleasure for us to be able to talk about this incredibly timely topic of homesick, the idea of the changing role of place during the global pandemic, especially in terms of the new competing roles of the home as refuge and workplace. And our speaker is eminently qualified to talk about this. I would spend a long time if I were to list Annmarie's many accomplishments. But I will highlight just a couple of things. She is a well-accomplished researcher in many intersectional spaces of architecture, history, healthcare, and medicine. And she is the recipient of the Faculty of Engineering's Christophe Pierre Award for Research Excellence, as well as the President's Award for Excellence in Media from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. Among her many publications are several monographs: Architecture and the Family Way, Doctors, Houses, and Women, 1870 to 1900. That was published in 96. We have Medicine by Design, The Architect and the Modern Hospital, 2008. And in between, there was a book called Designing Women, Gender, and Architectural Professions in 2000. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the podium over to Professor Adams, and I look forward to this very exciting talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick, for that gracious introduction, and thank you to IHSP colleagues for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for joining today. And as Nick said, this is a topic that's very dear to my heart and very timely. And I thought I'd start with this front page of the IHSP blog that I was invited to write, I think in July. It was the first time I had ever written for a blog, and I was delighted in its informality. But I'm starting with it today because incredibly, I can't believe how many people read it, and that it led to a whole series of events and invitations to write other blogs and other pieces all about COVID and the domestic interior. And so what I thought today, looking back on what's happened since I wrote this blog, is that what I thought I would do is, and here's a poster from one of the amazing events that came out of the blog, a roundtable with global mayors to talk about the rise of the domestic interior. What I thought I'd try to do is think back on all these things that have happened since the IHSP blog, and I've tried to streamline it into 10 sort of coherent points, trying to make it all make sense. I've used a couple of images for each point, and I've given Nick actually a list of the key points abstracted by keywords, and he's going to put them in the chat line for all of you to have. But as I said, the IHSP blog led to this amazing invitation to talk to global mayors and a bunch of other kind of rock star people in design about the rise of the interior. And it was an amazing thing because I got to be with the kind of people I'm never with. Kate Wagner from the Twitter post McMansion Hell. I know Nick is a big fan of hers. Christopher Hawthorne, the architectural critic of the LA Times, and then the new editor of Elle Decor magazine, Assad Sirkat. And we got to talk about very cool things like how you choose your outfit to go with your Zoom backdrop and what the impact on kitchens will be, and just questions that we don't ever really deal with at the university. And so this gig led to others, in fact, led to 2 other blogs and a book chapter and 3 lectures that are now on YouTube. And Nick too has offered to provide details of some of those for further reading and further watching. But as I said, my plan for today is to take a lot of the stuff I've been talking about since July, and I've boiled them down to these 10 points, these 10 keywords. And I'm going to use works of architecture or photographic evidence for each of them. And I'd like to admit right off the bat that I've kind of simplified some of them to make them a bit more provocative for our discussion. So bear with me with my simplifications. So my first, and I guess main point, and this really started with the IHSP blog, is that the domestic interior is becoming much more important in 2020 than it has been for a long, long time. And this very striking photo is one of many that I'll show from the recent New York Times 2020 in Photos series. It's from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and shows people kind of trapped in their similar apartments. And the kind of evidence that I've used to talk about the rise of the interior, I presented in this blog post, one of my favorite websites in the world, Parlor, an Australian website on women, equity, and architecture. I argued in Parlor a very obvious point that interiors are more important now because we are all confined to our domestic interiors, because our worlds are suddenly so contained, we see so few places every day, that we're willing to invest more time in them. More time, more money, and more study, I think, will be devoted to interiors. And so within the field of architecture and architectural history, we've seen the sudden rise of affiliate groups in the study of the history of interiors, for example. Interiors, in fact, have become a kind of buzzword in architecture and social media. And interestingly enough, there is like no real change in the use of the term interior. You can see on this engram that interior and interiors, the blue and red stripes, are pretty horizontal. Since 1960, architecture has its rises and falls. But in the Parlor blog, one of the things I challenge readers to do is to come up with new architectural vocabulary for the way that we are inhabiting domestic interiors. So already a lot of the words that we're using to describe our home life in COVID are spatial and architectural terms. So terms like cocooning, nesting, these are all terms that were very common after 9/11 too, and we see their uses rise every time there's some kind of a big crisis. But the difference between cocooning, sorry, in 2001 and today, one big change is that our consumption is curtailed. That is, we can't race out and buy new furniture and redecorate. So most of us who are obsessing on our home lives are working with what we have at hand, you know, rearranging furniture, reorganizing closets, all sorts of things. So on the Parlor blog, as I mentioned, I challenged readers to come up with new vocabulary beyond confinement, bubble, social distance. But very interesting that that vocabulary is already so architectural. Also really obvious in this idea of the rise of the interior is that our houses are now our workplaces and our schools. And then in the case of my own family, a dance studio. So this is our daughter, Katie, who is a professional dance student, and when the weather was good, would dance on our back deck. Our homes really are now the only places in our lives. And so, at least for many of us, so in architecture, this is a very big and kind of frightening idea that places and the concept of place might matter less after COVID. And so we've seen, if we bring this idea inside, like I'm actually in our bedroom speaking to you now, my bedroom is now my workplace. And then we've seen, of course, again, using our daughter, the idea that a living room can be emptied of furniture and become a daily dance space. Of course, there are many, many other examples of this. I just take this one from my own life. So the second point on my list, and this refers to the book that Nick mentioned in the introduction, is the unexpected relevance of the Victorian home in our new interior way of life. And my second keyword is in fact Victorian. Many architectural writers and researchers have noted that Victorian house stock, or at least houses built before World War II, are much, much better suited for lockdown than houses since World War II. And that is because, of course, Victorian houses have separate rooms and discrete circulation systems. You can actually close yourself off in a Victorian space. The same people have noted how terribly open plans are working for lockdown, especially in families where many people are working and going to school in the same space. So this is my PhD dissertation from 1990, and then became you can have dogs barking in the background, for example. Became the book Architecture in the Family Way in 1996. Is all about sickness and the home, and the interior, and the cover of it shows a Victorian house section, and this idea of discrete rooms that are planned for separate age, gender, and functions. So this tradition, which is really a British tradition of house designing, is very, very different, for example, than the tradition of Parisian apartments, which has no discrete circulation space. The rooms are arranged in a situation known as enfilade, like beads on a string, where you go from room to room to room. And in fact, in the 19th century, English architecture critics concluded that the apparent promiscuous lifestyle of Parisians might be related to this idea of the semi-open plan. And I think we're seeing a kind of return to that discourse under COVID. I guess another sort of personal thing that's interesting is that the stuff that I did so long ago, like 30 years ago, is suddenly very interesting to journalists and to others. And so many of you will know me as someone who studies hospitals, but I actually, as Nick said, got my start studying houses, and I still dabble in this kind of stuff. So in some of these international roundtables I've been on, I've made the point that the work at home situation in Montreal is quite distinctive because of some of our architectural traditions, and mostly because of the lot size in Montreal being very long and narrow, and the ubiquitous triplex plan, which you see on the screen here on the right, and a photo of a typical triplex from the plateau on the left. So a triplex plan, as many of you will know so well, is a very long and narrow plan and of attached houses. So there are no windows in the center of the plan. And what it means for those of us working on Zoom at home, where natural light is so important, is that we're all huddling to the front and the back of the houses. So I'm not in a triplex right now, but I am in an attached downtown house. That means I'm huddled against a window looking out on a back alley. So if you did a map of Montrealers working at home right now, you would see this intense activity at the front and the back of houses, a kind of barbelling of human occupation that I don't think we've seen ever before in house life. So my dissertation used stuff like this. This is a house section by a 19th century doctor, T. Pridgeon Teal, and a lot of 19th century doctors, well, a very specialized group of 19th century doctors took it upon themselves to understand how architecture worked in order to blame houses and blame architects for the spread of disease. And one of the things I argued in Architecture in the Family Way was that whenever medicine was unable to cure or to solve some kind of medical mystery, buildings were often blamed. We've seen that many times in the 20th century too. And this sort of questioned or destabilized the idea of the home as a refuge, as the home as a safe place, as an escape from city life and the dangers of city life. And so one of the book chapters I've been working on this fall, in fact, is about this fear of house life that I think many of us may develop if many more people get sick and are sick at home. So there's lots of work on how illnesses like tuberculosis have shaped architecture with sleeping porches, ventilation, and other living patterns. One of the things that I have looked at throughout a lot of my work are these tensions between doctors and architects. It's one of the things I study, and now I'm lucky, since 2016, I've been lucky enough to be in a faculty where I get to observe every day how medical people talk about place. So I feel like I'm now living in some of my field work. But this is one of my favorite images from my PhD work, which shows an architect working late at night on a house plan and being visited by a sewer rat who is explaining to him how his houses will be complicit in the spread of disease. So my third point, and the key word was sick, is this connection between being sick and being at home. Until about World War II, houses were actually designed to accommodate sick people. There was always a designated bedroom, usually called a sick room, and there are tons of paintings showing sick rooms. And on the left is one of my favorites. It's by the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch, and it's called Death in the Sick Room from 1895. And I thought I'd show it today beside this compelling image, again from the New York Times year in photo, of COVID patients sick at home. They're remarkably similar, I think, and the tradition of paintings, they're almost always the same. They have usually the bed is always at the center. We often see it like this in a foreshortened way. There's usually a religious image above the bed, and then there's a mixture of medical, religious, and family figures worrying and making decisions and communicating. So it's interesting to me that this tradition of photography that we're being saturated with images like this echoes so clearly this older tradition of image making. My fourth point, and the key word is empty, is that we are also being inundated with images showing empty public space. And I think we're most affected when we see spaces that we are used to seeing full and full of people. So I picked these two because this is where Nick and I work, the School of Architecture. Room 212 is on the left and the thesis studio is on the right. And it's really quite shocking, I think, to see your workplace empty. These are two photos by architecture graduate student Francis DiPietro of, as I say, our beloved McDonald Harrington building. And at that discussion forum with global mayors, the mayor of Milan, in fact, talked about this subconscious impact of us being flooded every day with images of familiar public places, but empty. We've never seen these places empty during the day. And here's the one that we used for the poster for today's event. Beautiful photo, kind of creepy in a way, of Place des Arts, of course, by Cynthia Kelly, who some of you may know. What I have here are just 4 images I'd like to show you, to just show you exactly what I mean, in case you haven't noticed these images, how shocking it is to see these places that we're so used to see full of people, full of tourists. So here's the Mona Lisa gallery at the Louvre, usually full of people taking pictures. New York City from Brooklyn. St. Peter's Square on Good Friday. And Place de la Concorde, I believe, in Paris. Point 5 is about social media. In fact, I'm writing a new paper about the impact of social media on COVID interiors right now. I have 2 parts, 2 things I want to say about this. The first is that I'm absolutely obsessed with the Twitter account Room Rater, and I hope all of you are too. It has tons and tons of followers, so I'm not the only one. And in case you don't know it, Room Rater, which is a Canadian and an American duo, so there's lots of Canadian content, rates Zoom interiors, usually famous media people who are domesticated in Room Raters, and then their interiors are rated. So this is voyeurism to an extreme. Of course, a lot of this love of the interior is about voyeurism. But I'm really interested in how it domesticates public figures, and especially when those public figures talk back. So I had to include our beloved Dean of Law, Robert Leckie, who I think is here today and was recently rated by Room Raters for his bookshelves. And then one of the most liked photos where the Bidens were domesticated right after the election. So they're always given a rating out of 10, and usually the person's politics play into the rating. So Republicans usually get 0. It's super funny. I feel like it's Saturday Night Live for Twitter. And I love that it kind of talks back. And then the second part of this new paper I'm working on social media looks at the images of Trump getting COVID. And the key word here was my number 6, refuge. And that, I think, really affected at the time, I guess it was October, the way we thought about domestic interiors and COVID. And that is, with the White House as an illustration, that is that the minute that Trump got his diagnosis, or soon after, he was almost expelled from his home. There was an expulsion from the White House. There's this idea that when you have COVID, you don't stay at home. And so he even needed a helicopter to get him to the hospital, which wasn't even so far away. So part of the imaging of this is the sort of flying away from home. You must fly away quickly, which leads to my point number 7. There's a kind of blurring of the cultural distinctions between the home and the hospital. So I think COVID has really changed our view of hospital space, blurring it with domestic space. And I guess I'll just say that it's a long-standing tension in the history of hospitals that many people believe that good hospitals should look like homes. I've been an outspoken critic of this. I don't think hospitals should look like homes. But it follows in this thinking that the best healthcare should look the homiest. So we shouldn't have been surprised that the presidential suite at the Walter Reed Hospital, Bethesda, looks so much like a fine hotel, as the newspapers pointed out. And we saw images of Trump working at a desk in the hospital suite. In the last part of the talk, I'll actually turn to the impact on hospital architecture. My point 8 is hospital, and I think as our collective view of the home as a refuge changes into a workplace, it has also shaped this idea of the hospital as a refuge. It's destabilized it. And one of the, I think, big ideas, and again, I'm simplifying this just for the point of being more provocative and hoping we can talk about it, is that what's happened is that the hospital architecture has illustrated to us that walls don't really matter anymore in hospitals, that they don't do their job in keeping COVID contained. Now I just had to find a way to include this slide too. I love it so much because, as you may have noticed, it shows John Evans, the father of our Tim Evans, looking so much like his son on the left, and hospital architect Eb Zeidler, and the two of them are talking about the project of McMaster Hospital, which was so revolutionary in the 1970s and was based on the idea of the power of walls, that walls could be changed and hospitals could be infinitely flexible. We've certainly lost that dream with COVID. So instead, we have proof that walls don't really matter with COVID. And we see these amazing images of temporary hospitals set up in sports arenas, or they're almost like circus tents. I think of the Nightingale Hospital in London. I hope you've all seen that BBC footage of the fast motion footage of it being constructed. But what's important to notice is that we've kind of returned to the pavilion plan hospital. Plans like a pavilion plan hospital is like the old Royal Vic, with open wards where 36 patients would all be together. Here you have hundreds of patients together, where only air and space separates the patients, because it no longer matters to have walls. So the new wall, I would say, is the PPE. So most of us didn't even know what this was a year ago. Certainly I didn't know. So instead of bricks and mortar walls, healthcare workers now wear clothing that does the job formerly done by walls. My 9th point is threshold. That I think what all of this means, this changing idea about walls and whether they work, has pointed to a newly important threshold that marks the line between private and public. And in this case, this is our house, so this is our front window facing the street. So this line is often between the domestic interior and the public exterior. And sometimes in the late 20th and early 21st century, we have subconsciously or unknowingly decorated new places that are important, new spots in cities before they have any real architectural character. So an example of this, for example, is the spots where people are accidentally killed, or especially where bike accidents take place and there are ghost bikes. Now I think in COVID, it's the front wall of the house is now the great divide. And so it's where we've been putting the beautiful hand-drawn rainbows. And it's also newly a space of encounter. It's the only place where we, you know, talk to the mail delivery person or get parcels. So I have 3 shots, 3 photos of this important line to make this point between public and private. It's an incredible photo of an ICU patient being taken out to see the sea. Shocking to us because the patient has gone from the deepest, most exclusive interior to this public space. We also see this just in ordinary houses where the porch, the threshold, the entry space is this, as I say, new space of encounter. This is someone checking on a suspected COVID patient in the US. And then again, I'd like to return to the tradition of art history. As you can see, I'm a great believer in the fact that artists sense and denote these important cultural changes before buildings and architects actually pick them up. And that is that we're putting an enormous amount of cultural energy into the facades of buildings, not only marking them with rainbows, but actually just sort of hanging out on them, occupying them. So on the left, you see Manet's very famous painting called The Balcony from 1868, which in fact shows 4 figures, 3 in the light and a 4th person hovering behind. And then quite a famous photo from COVID from Italy, where many apartment dwellers played music together at certain times of day. So this place of encounter, I think, is very key. And then finally, my last point, and the key word was the grid. I think we're actually going to be living in a grid that's not yet marked by architecture, but is marked in these more ephemeral ways. The grid, of course, has a long history in urban and architectural history as a kind of force of democracy, everything from Roman cities to Thomas Jefferson's utopian idea for dividing the United States in a fair way, or the plan of Manhattan, the plan of so many cities is set this way. And so we see these photos of people in public space the people are located in a kind of gridded, structured way. And it hit me a few days ago when I read this great article in The Guardian, maybe some of you saw it, about how COVID has rewired our brains. And the journalist said, pandemic cues are not organic. They are a series of regularly spaced people being processed by a wayfinding system. And it kind of hit me when I read that is in fact our new spatial order, just like this apartment building. That in addition to the one-way traffic systems that we've basically learned from grocery stores, we are now all living in these gridded patterns, even though the architecture itself has not caught up. But I think the architecture of the future is going to capture this kind of gridded system. So my final slide, in fact, is to stop sharing and to look at all of us in gallery view, because this is the proof. Look at us. We are, in fact, in a gridded composition today together, and this is the new architecture. We are it. And that's my talk. 31 minutes, sorry, it's a bit short.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Annmarie. This is both provocative and really exciting in thoughtful ways that I don't think are problematic. And I'm seeing questions popping up in the chat. Please do feel free. I don't want to I don't want to waste time other than to of course, once again, say this is an excellent set of arguments. I think there's lots of discussion that will emerge from this in the days and weeks and months to come. I am going to invite the individuals who posed questions in the chat to start. And what I'm actually going to do is suggest that Gabriella Kantz, if you could perhaps open your microphone and read your question. And then I noticed that Daniel Weinstock has a sort of a complimentary follow-up question, which I'll ask Daniel to ask next. And then we'll go to Matt Lee, who posed an intermediary question. So Gabriella, please.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to say thank you very much. This was fascinating. I was hoping you could give your opinion on how you see the future of public spaces, especially in the downtown core, and big office towers and dense housing, and how that's going to be impacted by people searching out more space and moving to the suburbs.
Sorry, Nick, my Wi-Fi froze and I only heard going to the suburbs.
Okay. Gabriella, did you want to repeat that?
Maybe I'll just unplug my computer and move a bit.
Okay. So it was on the future of public and office spaces in central neighborhoods, especially the, sort of the quintessential North American downtown or central district, the towers, as people are moving both home and work and other daily routines into suburban and peri-urban space, especially people, well, mainly people who have means, but even those who are living in undesirable or sort of marginal circumstances.
Right. Well, so that's a huge question. And I'd say that's, when I talk to journalists, that's the most asked question. And I'm just reminded so much about how we all thought after 9/11 that that was the end of the office tower, and it never was. So I can only hope that offices will be able to be renovated and remade, used in innovative ways. But it does seem like a number of businesses have decided not to reoccupy their offices, and I don't know what that's going to mean for real estate.
Daniel, did you want to piggyback onto that now?
Sure. Thank you so much, Annmarie. And I should say I'm so happy. I had no idea that the IHSP blog had given rise to such an explosion of superstardom. That's really fantastic. So I guess my question is kind of like the flip side of Gabriella's, which is what, you know, I mean, I think you've described the way in which people have changed their use of their own homes in ways that we all recognize. I mean, I'm sitting in a part of the house that we basically never used. I transformed it into an office. We had all this kind of inefficiently used space, which we didn't really worry about the inefficiency of, because we spend whatever 60-70% of our waking hours not in the home. So I wonder whether you have any sense of whether these are permanent changes in the way in which we use our homes, or whether we will revert back to, especially in a city like Montreal, those of us who live downtown or close to downtown, getting up, getting out, and working in cafes and in our offices.
Well, unfortunately, I don't feel very confident forecasting the future, since I'm a historian. But I will say that personally, I am surprised that I have enjoyed being home so much, because I'm really a person that's always loved to be at work. So that's given me a new kind of joy and appreciation of my home life and my neighborhood that I think I will retain. I think it will enrich the way I think about home. But at the same time, of course, I'm just dying to go back to work and have lunch out and be beside Phoebe Friesen, who I see right there, my next door neighbor, and just be back in the kind of unpredictable space of McGill. But I think we'll all be touched by this time we had at home. One thing I think, Daniel, is really tied to your question is something I've started to worry about, and that is that all our lives are becoming more alike. And so you see this in like fashion magazines where, you know, fashion is really just from the waist up and we're all wearing gray sweatpants. And then I just start to think about my street and how I can see in the front windows of every house that there's someone like me sitting at a computer at a desk. And will it mean a kind of homogenization of life? And it really seems like that's what's happening.
Thank you.
I was just taking a quick shot because I have a setup here where I face into a courtyard just like the movie Rear Window, and I thought exactly what's going on. I can look out and I see a number of people doing exactly what all of us are doing at any given moment between about 8 o'clock and 6 o'clock on a typical weekday.
Yeah. I mean, it has made me realize how disorganized our house was, and how could I ever have had cupboards that were really like that, and you know, all these all these things, like
Right.
Our house has never really been this organized. It's really great. But not everybody has the privilege that we do of working from home, and
yeah, and
that's
especially
something to
having
think about too.
the latitude and the ampler of space that those of us who are in 1 to 4 person households in an
Yes.
8.5 room plex might have. But that's of course, you know, that's a perennial question. It's just become more obvious in certain. I think, yeah. Matt Lee has an interesting question, which takes us over to the hospital realm. So I think that's a very important tip of the hat to the blurring that Annmarie is referring to.
Yeah, so my question is, what is your thoughts on moving all the hotspots to the outdoor for COVID treatments? Like a number of hospitals in Montreal, they're setting up all these tents in the parking lots for better ventilations. So like I sent a link in the chat where in New York Times, Central Park is being used for treatment center as well. I guess like contrasting that one image of Donald Trump and the hotel en suites, like that's the opposite of the spectrum, right? So like, what is your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do think it's in general, I think it's a good idea to have the isolation of COVID patients in temporary or specially designed hospitals. Also because it allows the hospital to function a bit more normally for other patients. But I, as a hospital architecture person, I have been amazed at these construction of these buildings in, you know, 10 days to 2 weeks, and thought about how it took 20 years to build our MUHC. I've thought about that a lot, and how designers and design expertise has been operationalized so quickly and efficiently.
I guess a follow-up question is that, like, has our traditional way of building hospital have not been encountering this kind of, well, there's a demand for this outdoor better ventilation, kind of like wards, right? And it's not in like our current hospital design. Like,
yes,
would that change the way we design the future, that we do encounter this like outdoor area that's designated for pandemic?
absolutely. So yeah, COVID has defied avant-garde hospital design for sure. But what I think is so interesting is that it's the model it's returned to is the model from 120 years ago of the, you know, basically the miasma theory hospital, where patients are all together and the flush of fresh air is what keeps people safe.
Anna Horton has a question that's just popped up in the chat. So Anna, please, if you want to articulate that. Might need to turn your microphone on. I'm not sure.
Hi, thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. I'm just curious, as more recent lockdowns have kind of criminalized socializing in domestic spheres while simultaneously allowing people to enter interior spaces such as businesses, I wonder if you had any comments on that and how that might affect people's relationship to their homes.
Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the great myths of the 19th century and the 21st century is this idea of the home as a safe refuge for all, as a happy, healthy place. And I think actually one of the things a lot of journalists have asked me about is what is going to happen if a lot of people get sick and are at home. Won't the home turn into a kind of place of whatever the opposite of refuge is, an image of hell? And I think that that's absolutely what would happen. And I think the sort of foreshadowing of that is what we've seen in long-term care. I mean, it's been so horrible for us to see those long-term care interiors, because they are for us an image of of happy old age and safety. And they have become just just so horrific. And I think the rise in violence, domestic violence, is the same thing. It's just, and this is a point that Christopher Hawthorne made in this roundtable, is that we don't see the images of domestic violence. And in fact, we hardly ever see images of people sick at home. So it's one of the reasons that we are so compelled to think of it as a disease that's in the hospital. So I wish somehow that some images could be made to get that message across. So this new book chapter I'm working on is called House Fear, and it's about being afraid of being home, which is a huge theme. I can't imagine what it's like to be home alone during this time too. I'm in a family with 4 of us, so I'm hardly ever alone. My family members are on here, I think, so I won't say more.
I think that's a really important theme that we only are seeing little glimmers of, and I think it's those of us who maybe have a sort of a, let's say, a supervisory or a managerial role, where I've had 2 cases since August of where someone who's somehow below me in the organogram as a staff member or as a student has had to move out of the domestic realm in which he or she's located because of sexual assault, as well as one case of enduring a sexual assault. And it's we know that there's been a surge in domestic violence, and that home is becoming more of a sort of a space of danger, of course, because it's become a kind of pressure cooker. What I notice, I live on a busy street on the front end of my long narrow lot, and I notice a lot of people who are both driving around or just parking and sitting in their cars, because being in a car is sort of the only private space that they are able to carve out when they're sharing their domestic realm with 2 or 3 or 7 other people in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, the car interior is another, I thought of having it as a key word because it's so important in the Trump story too, where once he thinks he's better, he, goes out in the SUV in this sealed interior, except sealed up with other people who he's putting in danger. But it's interesting how the car has become like a porch to go, like a mobile house.
Yeah. I'm going to take the privilege of asking you a question, Annmarie. What do you think? You mentioned that the sort of the ephemeral architecture, so to speak, of certain healthcare arrangements and so on and so forth, and that the physical architecture catches up. In the same sort of on the same line of thinking, the temporality of what this means. What do you think the hangover will be in terms of how people think about the home as both a different kind of refuge in good ways and a space that is all too familiar because it's become a kind of a prison? What the hangover in the sense of, do you think there'll be a sort of a after the pandemic, let's say, passes and we're in a lull before the next vector-borne disease emerges and spreads, do you think there'll be a kind of resentment toward home or a strange new embracing of public life?
Yeah, I have no idea, Nick. That's more like your area than mine. But I do think I personally will remember my time at home with fondness. I don't think I will resent it, but I really have I have no idea whether I will. But I do want to say, in relation to your question, that I have loved the kind of return to the handmade and the low tech and the rainbows and the sourdough bread and all of those, and the knitting, all of that stuff. Just the slowing down of our lives. And of course, you see that in the hospital too. The nurses wearing garbage bags, and just sort of the de-emphasis on technology as the answer. I think that might stay with us.
Yes, indeed. It's sort of the renaissance of bricolage, but
yes.
But Robert Licky's made this very interesting point around the gap between those baking and gardening at home and those who are in many instances invisible to us, those of us who are white or gold collar, professional, academic, etc., managerial sorts of folks, and those who are confined and living in uncomfortably
absolutely
crowded. So I don't know if
yes.
I wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, no, it's a huge difference, of course, and not as documented. Yeah. Although by photographers it is. But I am a huge believer that artists are these sensitive souls who are out there figuring out everything for us and then giving us the cues to move forward. And I think in this case, the photographers are really doing it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll invite questions to become live. We don't need to have the interlocution, so to speak, of the chat Gabriella Francis just typed a question, so I'll turn the podium to you. Yes, Gabriella, please.
I hope it's okay. I'm jumping in with a second question.
Yes.
I was curious, do you think that in architecture education, there will be more focus on accessible design, on health concerns, on that aspect of more social policy than there has been perhaps in the past? And will architects become more accessible to the population? Because right now, to hire an architect to design your home, you have to really have the means to do this. I don't know, I'm just wondering if the future generation of architects will become more necessary as people put more emphasis on how their homes are designed.
Well, of course, I would like that to be true, and Nick and I both teach courses that have strong social impacts, but there are these different schools of thought in architectural education that the beauty of the form is what is important. And the best schools, of course, have people who believe in both parts, and students find their ways. But what I really hope will happen is that subjects like, I see multi-generational housing too as a question in the chat, topics like that, and like long-term care, and like ICU design, will become topics that students take on for their thesis projects. Right now, these topics are considered very low prestige, well, in the case of hospital design, students think it's too hard, too complicated. They'll never win an award if they do their thesis on a hospital. And in the case of long-term care, even architectural firms don't really take it on because it's so low budget and so low visibility, never gets published, never gets awards. So what I would really hope for, like this is something that a donor could really make a difference in, is to invent some like great design award for innovation in long-term care that architects would be drawn to, or students. That would make such a big impact. Or that we have just awards within schools that recognize thesis projects that have social impact would be fantastic, not just that are beautiful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Nick and I have been working on that a long time. We'll just continue to work and
yes.
Hope people will listen.
We'll soldier on, and I'll put in I've put a link into the chat the blog that IHSP has sponsored, and there are a number of really interesting entries, including one by Annmarie that's well worth reading, and that, as she mentioned, was the springboard for this talk and many of the activities. I did one which is perhaps relevant, and this isn't shameless self-promotion at all, but it certainly hasn't attracted the kind of attention, but it's because it's unsexy to talk about things like the idea of care at the level of policy. And I think we are nevertheless seeing a reorientation and a rethinking. The argument that I made there is that we're seeing a renaissance of sorts of the welfare state, and the idea that there are going to be mandates. So it's not just the education of architects, but it's also that there will be mandates for thinking through and implementing things and spaces and interventions that are supportive of health under new definitions, both in sort of more objective evidence-based terms, so to speak, but also in terms of perceptions and expectations and so on and so forth. Kristen Rodniak, I apologize if I mispronounced the name there, has asked that interesting question. Maybe you want to open your microphone and present that, because I think that's a good one for us to continue with, as we have a couple of minutes left in our conversation.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I was just interested in what you had to say kind of on multi-generational homes and the idea of kind of multi-generationals living together, and if this would be something that, you know, post-COVID, if that's something that would be influenced based on all of us spending so much time at home, if that would kind of impact, you know, people caring for elder grandparents or anything like that, if there's some adjustment to home design that you might see incorporating some of those ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and topic to think about. And it is something that I know Nick has had a research project on this and has a master's thesis looking at how changing zoning regulations could free up, could liberate people to, you know, add to their houses in ways that hasn't been allowed to before. And also related to that, I think, with all the schooling that's going on at home, I think there is this idea that there might be spaces for learning built into houses. One, you might be interested to know that, like, these gurus in design, like from El Decor, actually believe that we might build second kitchens. You know, one for show on Zoom, and one that we actually cook in. I don't really know whether many people would do that, but that's something that designers are talking about. So there is this idea of making the house bigger and duplicating rooms, because some have the show and some don't.
Exactly.
I mean, it's zoning that's keeping us from it.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say a number of my grads on the planning side regularly talk to me, especially those who are in the lower mainland in BC, talk about how so many of the proposals or the applications for special variances are about second kitchens, because there's so many cultures in the world that have hot kitchens, cold kitchens, and they're not accommodated in the Anglo-American normal of the domestic realm. And that, of course, sets up all kinds of tensions, because once you have a second kitchen, you can technically count that as a second unit if you just throw up another partition. So that strikes fear into the campaigners who say that immorality will arise if we have more than one household sharing as well. I see a final question, just because we're running down on time, from our IHSP director. So please, Ari, if you want to jump in there.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, sorry for the late question. But I couldn't help but ask, given the context that we're currently in with the School of Population and Global Health planning its move from these smallish, but quite large mansions, where we've got a lot of separate rooms and offices and spaces for faculty and staff and students, to a centralized office space downtown. And going back to your earlier points about, you know, seeing the need to reinvest, I think you said, in office spaces. What do you think kind of the implications of this pandemic will be for this? Will there be kind of a shift away from large open spaces? Do you see a need for investment in ventilation and HVAC systems? So this is just a curiosity of mine.
Yeah, I think there'll be a shift away from open landscapes. There already is a shift away from it. And I think there will also be this idea of having separate ventilation systems for your rental space. That, for example, your whole office building wouldn't have the same. That your company would take care of you with an extra good ventilation space. But personally, I'm just much happier staying in places that have windows that open and separate rooms. I'm pretty happy in my McGill mansion with the broken old window that doesn't even close. I think it's probably pretty safe. One other thing I want to say related to many of the questions is that I think one of the ways that we change architecture has to be from outside architecture. So even though we don't teach universal design in architecture schools, one of the reasons I wanted to move my job in 2016 to medicine is so that I could teach medical students about architecture. I really believe that one of the mistakes we've made in architecture is to only teach our own students and to have our courses closed off to other students at the university. And that we're really, the way to shape change is to open our architecture up so other people can make wise architectural decisions. So that's why I'm in medicine now, in case some of you wondered.
Excellent, excellent. And I think that's a very fine ending point because it's about the cross-disciplinary moments that IHSP
Yes.
represents and does so well. And I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat about opening
Yes.
windows that open. A classic study in satisfaction is that when people are able to open a window and symbolically or really manipulate the ambience of their environment, they are much happier. It's been shown to improve productivity and satisfaction in so many ways, and it's purely a locus of control question. But this is the kind of thing that we only realize when we have these sorts of cross-faculty and cross-disciplinary conversations. So I think on that note, I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today. It's wonderful to see a good crowd.
I'm saving the chat.
Yes,
so
indeed.
I can take them all with me.
And I'd ask everyone once more to give a warm round of virtual applause to our excellent speaker for this very
Thanks everybody. So great to see you. Hope to see you in real life soon, outside the grid.
Likewise.
Hi, Robert.
Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend, a healthy and restful holiday if you're not going to be seen by any of us soon.
Thanks, Nick.
Pleasure.
You're an awesome MC.